So in the past I made a video showing how I built this ukulele rack that's on my wall above my bed. However, now I want to build something for storing my collection of larger stringed instruments. Since I moved to this apartment, I've been using this space directly beside my desk for storing my guitars and banjos, and it's worked okay. I've got them all, packed in there pretty tightly, which is great for minimizing the amount of floor space that they take up. But the problem is that it's fairly difficult with them packed that closely together to actually be able to pull out an instrument to use it without them bumping into one another and, of course, damaging them. So I'd like to move these musical instruments out of here and free up that floor space, because over here I've got this storage shelf which I use for storing other musical instruments and other musical related things. And what I'd like to do is build a new shelf in its place that will fit in that spot there. And I'll build the shelf so it can still accommodate all the stuff that's sitting on it right now. But I'm also going to build it a little bit taller because I still have a bit of ceiling space above that. And I'm also going to build it in such a way that I'll be able to hang those other 5 larger instruments so that they'll be taking up less floor space, and they'll also be much easier to access and take down than they are right now. So this is the basic design that I've come up with. As I said, it's going to have storage spots for 5 of my instruments: my acoustic guitar, 2 electric guitars, my banjo, and my bass guitar. It's primarily going to be constructed out of 2x2 lumber, lots of 2x2s, and then it's got these 3 separate plywood shelves, which I figure will be approximately about the right amount of shelf space to incorporate all this stuff that I currently have stored on the shelves of that cabinet. I've also left this space here below, which will allow me to store my bass guitar amplifier. I made sure that it was just tall enough for it to be able to slide under there. And on the other side, I've got enough space for keeping my Cajón, which again is about the same size. With my shelf right now, you saw before, I keep my bass amplifier and my Cajón in front of that shelf, but I figure by leaving the space here, I'll be able to keep it underneath and take up even less floor space. So based on my design, I've calculated that I'm going to need at least 9 8-foot 2x2s, but I'm probably going to buy 10 just to have a little bit of extra material. And it's a beautiful day to be outside, so I'm going to use my bike trailer to pick up that lumber. Alright, so after lots of trial and error, I've got all of my 2x2s mounted on the back of my trailer. What I did was I got some inner tube and I wrapped them around these top rails of the frame of the trailer, and that's to keep the boards from slipping. And then I've got bungee cords which are pulling them against that rubber surface, as well as the rubber is actually tied on the bottom to hold those 2 surfaces together. Same on the back, except the boards are sitting on the top of the rail there. But underneath, the inner tubes are being used in the very same way. So hopefully it'll last me for the whole ride home. Alright, so 4 kilometers later and I'm back home, safe and sound. I have to say this was one of the craziest loads I've ever carried. Basically every time I would go over a bump, it would make the trailer kind of start to rock, back and forth in this direction. And if one of the wheels happened to hit something like a bump and the other one didn't, then it would cause it to start, swaying back and forth from side to side. And it just kept going like that for a while at least. It kind of works like a pendulum. It just keeps swaying back and forth. But it was fun riding, and it was a nice quiet road, so it wasn't really too dangerous. So I've cut a bunch of the pieces to size now, and I've started joining some of them together. So far I'm just using wood screws to hold everything together. I was thinking about maybe doing some other kind of fancy joinery, but I think with the way that this structure is built, there's enough cross bracing and everything that these kind of joints should be sufficient. I may eventually take those screws out after I've got everything put together and then re-glue all of the joints, but I'm not exactly sure I'll do that. So in this project I found there's a lot of situations where I want to be joining together 2 by 2 so that they're at 90 degrees. And it's really important to make sure when you're attaching these, when you're screwing this in, that this angle here is exactly 90. You don't want it to be, a little bit off in either direction because when you put it together it's not going to fit properly. And you also want to make sure that this surface here is sitting flat with this here, so you know that they're not a little bit off in this direction either. And I found it's kind of hard to be able to keep this stationary when you're drilling your holes for your screws, and there's not really an easy way of clamping this thing in place when you're doing the drilling. So I developed this little jig here, which is really quite simple. It just has a metal angle bracket here, which makes it exactly 90 degrees, and I've verified it with my square that it's actually 90. And then I just screwed on some scrap pieces of 2 by 2, and then that's going to sit up against here, and then to be able to keep these things in line with the 2 by 2s on here, I put these little pieces of plywood which overhang a little bit. So all you have to do is just insert that in there like that, and then insert this one in there, and then get it in the exact place that you want it. And then you just need 2 quick clamps that you can just put on here like this in place, and then another one over here. And then that's going to guarantee that these things are sitting exactly at 90 degrees, and so they're flat, and then you can easily drill your holes and put your screws in without them moving out of square. Alright, so I cut a bunch more pieces, and I've got all of these ones here screwed together. This is going to be the whole back of the frame, the part of the shelf that goes right up against the wall. And I have to say the jig that I made really came in handy for getting all of those 90-degree angles screwed together and clamped in place before drilling the holes. I did also put a few 45s in. My jig was no help for that. I may consider making a 45-degree version of it, but for putting these ones in, I just used the clamp on the side, and it seemed to hold it stationary enough for drilling my holes and putting my screws in. Alright, so it's the next morning now, and this project is really coming along. As I showed in the last clip, I had finished that whole flat back panel, but then I've mounted all the pieces which extend from it, at least near the bottom, and now it's able to stand up properly. I do still have a bit more structure which goes up near the top there, and so far I've really, other than those 45s that I put along the back, I haven't put any more 45-degree angled pieces in. Alright, so the next piece I'm going to tackle is one of these 45s, and I'm going to screw in here like this to give it some cross bracing. This is going to be a tricky one to clamp in place when I'm drilling the holes and putting the screws in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a scrap piece of wood here to hold this one so it'll push up against there. And I'll just put some clamps on there to hold that in place so it won't move. Like so. And then up on this end I'll take another clamp and I'll clamp that like that just to hold that joint together. I'm hoping that'll be strong enough with this pushing up against there and this kind of holding those 2 pieces aligned. And then from back here I'll come through with my drill at an angle. Like that. Before I drill the second hole, I'm going to put the first screw in. For the 45s, I'm using these long 3-inch screws. So let's put that in there with the impact driver. That should be pretty secure. I can take the clamp off now. And then for a little bit of extra strength, I'll put a second screw in, kind of over here on the other side, on a similar angle. And there we go, and that's a pretty secure connection there. So then for securing the other end of that cross bracing, and unfortunately I painted myself into a little bit of a corner here because I want to have those screws coming in from down here, but unfortunately this post here is kind of in my way for drilling and screwing in those holes. But that's not a big deal because this is all just screwed together. So I'll just take this post off and then secure that and then put the post back on again. So now I've just tilted everything on its side to be able to access down here. I'm just going to use one clamp on the side here to hold those in alignment. Now start by drilling some holes. Put in my screws. And there you go. And now I can just put that leg back on. Alright, so I got the cross braces in on both sides, plus the other diagonals that are up here, as well as the ones up here. And now the whole structure is complete, and there's only two tasks left to do. One of the remaining tasks is to cut the shelving, which will go on the 3 different layers, where there'll be shelves. There'll be one that's right here, another one up there, and a final one down at this level down here. The other task is to install the hooks, which will actually support the musical instruments. And I've got all my hooks purchased now. The 4 guitars are going to use this black style of hanger, and the banjo, since it has a little bit narrower neck, is going to use this gray one here. So the banjo is going to hang right around here, and I want it to be well centered between these 2 posts. And I'm going to put my hook into here, something like that. And I want to get this on a good angle, so the banjo is not going to come off on me. For mounting the banjo, I wanted to make sure I put this bracket so it was high enough so that the tuners that stick out the back wouldn't hit the wood on the top. So before drilling a hole in the actual shelf, I just clamped this scrap of 2x2 up here, and I've been doing some tests. And this is the second hole that I drilled, and I'm pretty sure that will work pretty well. With it in that position there, you can see there's lots of space behind so the banjo won't hit up against the shelf, as well as lots of space on either side. Alright, so now I'll drill the actual hole. I left the test one up here so I could compare them as I'm drilling. So I want to get on something, an angle like that. I don't want to go too deep. About that deep like that. And I'll get this out of my way. And then I'll screw this bracket in here. And there's the first thing in place. So now in front of those, my 2 guitars hang here and here. So I'll get some hooks installed for those. Alright, so I've got 1 guitar installed now. All I did was just put that hook, drilled a hole in the end of that piece of wood there. So I'm just going to repeat the process on the other side for the other guitar. So I'm just going to start by drilling a pilot hole with a smaller bit in the end there and get it approximately where I want it. Like so. Then I change to my larger bit, which is the right size for accepting those hooks. And then I just take my hook and screw it inside there. It's important to make sure you drill a hole that's going to be the right size so that your hook will be, you know, fairly snug in the hole, but not so tight that when you're tightening it in, it's going to split the wood. Alright, there's that. And I'll test it out with my other guitar. Perfect. Alright, so I put the rest of the hooks in, and now as you can see I've got all my instruments neatly hung up there. And they're all sitting in such a way that none of them are touching one another, and you can easily come and grab an instrument and pick it up off the shelf and play it for a bit and just easily put it right back where it was. All that's left now is to cut out the shelving, which will hold all the stuff that's sitting on my existing cabinet over there. So for my shelving I'm going to be using this 1/2 inch MDF material, and I picked this up on my bike trailer earlier today. So I got that panel cut, and I cut out all the little cutouts for where the 2x2s stick through it, and to be able to get it in there was really challenging. I had to undo a few screws and take off a few pieces to be able to fit it in there, but I've successfully done it and it seems to fit pretty good. I think I did a pretty good job. I did leave a little bit of a gap there, but other than that I think it looks pretty good. Alright, so it's a few days later now, and I've got all of my levels of shelving cut to size and installed on my rack here. As you saw in the clip, I used my bandsaw for cutting the shelving to size, and I realized that really isn't the ideal, you know, tool for making long straight cuts of paneling, but it's the best thing that I have available to me here in my apartment. You know, it doesn't leave a perfectly straight surface. You know, this surface here you can see is a little bit wavy. I did my best to follow the line. But really I don't think it's too much of a problem. It's good enough for me. In my original design for this shelf, I'd only been planning on putting in 3 levels of shelving. This one up here, this one down here, and this big one down here. But I always knew that there was this little bit of space back here that it would be possible to put a shelf in. So since I had a little bit of leftover material, I decided to put a few extra pieces of wood there to support a shelf that could go back there. It's not a big shelf, but it should be able to support a few things. For holding each of the levels of shelving in place, I decided to use these roofing nails, and I mostly chose these because they have a really big head on them, so I figured that they'd spread out the force and they'd do a good job of, you know, holding the paneling down. I wouldn't need to use too many of them. I also like the way that they look. I think it's, you know, neat that they have this big head on them that kind of sticks a little bit above the surface. And I don't think that they stick up enough that they're really going to interfere with anything that sits on the shelf. When I was preparing this top shelf up here, I made a little cutout for around where the banjo goes, because as I showed before, when the banjo's hanging on the rack, I don't want the tuners to be coming in contact with anything. So I do plan on painting this rack to make it look a little bit nicer, but I don't want to do that today. Today what I'd like to do is I'd like to move the old shelf out of the spot where it's sitting right now and try fitting in this shelf, and also seeing if all the stuff that I have in my old rack will fit on my shelving space that I have here. Alright, and there you have it. The shelf fits in the spot where it's supposed to go pretty much perfectly, and all the stuff that I had on my old shelf fits very nicely on my new shelf. And now when I'm sitting on my desk over here at my computer doing something and I have the urge to play one of my instruments, it's really easy for me to come over here and grab one of these off the shelf. The only one that's a little bit harder is my bass, because it's all the way over here, but it's still possible to do it right here from my computer chair. Well, anyway, I hope you've enjoyed joining me following along with this project. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought, and thanks for watching.